Okay.
All right, so I'm in, if you go to the bottom, I've just highlighted this. There's this little section about materialism,
Yes.
and it was definitely not the main point. It was almost irrelevant, but I'm just curious. Monists are people who believe in one religion, I think, or but one God, I mean.
No, that's
And then,
monotheism you're thinking.
sorry?
That's monotheism you're thinking of.
Ah, okay.
Monism is something else.
So what, maybe I missed monism. It's like it's everything is either physical or it's all mental. Is that what the monism is?
Um, kind of, but everything is ultimately reducible to a single thing in some sense or another. Like monism could be like it all reduces to like a single notion of like, well, the word monism comes from the word monad, which is a concept Leibniz came up with to say that essentially everything's constructed of monads, as in like it's the ultimate building block of everything. In a
Oh
way, they're
wow.
like atoms, so it's like, but they're singular. And there's like just a one substance or type of thing in existence that everything is. Ultimately, they're this one thing. That's in contrast to pluralism, which is there's more than one kind of thing fundamentally. That goes back to the ancient Greeks. Like, I think one guy, Democritus, believed in the atom, which everything was singular ultimately. And I think the other guy was Anaxagoras, and he's saying there's multiple types of substances, like earth, wind, and fire, I think were the
Yeah.
main substances. And that's the kind of distinction we're talking about. But
Ah, okay.
but
Okay.
not necessarily, of course, that a mystical way, just that everything can to be reduced to a single constituent of some kind.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it's cool that the origin is in monad, which Leibniz wrote
Yeah,
about.
the guy who came up with calculus.
Yeah. Okay, well that's fine. That's fine, I get it. I'm
Yeah,
in the chapter two on sense perception.
yeah,
Okay, so let's just go to you in that chapter. I can't see you in there.
yeah. I'm there.
Oh, you in? Okay, cool.
Oh,
Because it doesn't show you.
oh, chapter 2, you said?
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
So let's see. The first section. It's about the stick being bent in water and how it's not a perceptual error. Like someone might say, okay, well, our senses can deceive us because when you put a stick under water, it's actually bent. And so there's deception there. And then this part is saying, well, no, the point is that the senses capture every bit of information. For example, right now they're capturing, I don't know, the light refracting in water or whatever it is. And so they're giving you all the information you need. And so the senses are valid. That was this context for the
Generally, yeah.
this yeah. And then so I'm just wondering, like I was thinking, okay, let's assume that I'm a pre-scientific observer because if I read something now and I'm like, um, oh yeah, okay, there's this thing called refraction. I know there's physics, there's Einstein, like they're real things. And I can go, yes, that makes sense. But if I'm pre-scientific, like I'm just trying to imagine what kind of reasoning process I'd go through to if I'm just using philosophy, since philosophy is just dependent on observation, right? Then what reasoning would I go through? I'm like, well, the stick doesn't, it's my senses are not giving me the correct information. Like, where do you go from there? Like if you don't know refraction or anything like that.
Well, it's just to say that your interpretation is separate from the way things look. I think that's maybe the easier way to think of it. That yes, what you're seeing and sensing is that way. It's not wrong. That is how it looks. But what you say about it is different. You have to make some conclusion to say that's wrong or that's incorrect or is telling me something that isn't the case. Um,
I
so it's
was,
a
I
just
was
Go
Yeah, I was
ahead.
trying to develop a hypothetical for, because I know what you're saying. There's a distinction between the interpretation and the sensory data, and they're saying the sensory data is valid. In this case, when you see the stick bent underwater and you say it's a sensory illusion, the error is the interpretation. But I was trying to develop a hypothetical so I could go, because when I read that, I'm like, yes, okay, that is a good point. I get it. But if I was like trying to learn philosophy 500 years ago, I'm trying to understand how would I go, okay, yes, that's true, the senses are valid. Because, and the reason I want to do that is because I want to know if this is something that is, if this basically this development of this philosophy is dependent on actual scientific discovery. For you to go, okay, well, there's refraction, so the senses are valid. Or it's, does that make sense? Do you know what I'm trying to do?
I think so. Um, if you want to think of a hypothetical, I'm trying to think of a
Without
different way to
dependent on
frame
any
it.
science.
Just
I
thinking a
came
way to
up with
frame it.
some, but I
Well,
still wasn't sure.
tell me your thought of one you came up with.
Okay, let's have a look at what I wrote down. Okay, so I would go, assuming I don't feel fear, which I might if I don't have a mind that is like aware of a thing called, there's reasoning, and reason can allow you to draw conclusions about the world, and then there's emotion, which is something else. Assuming I'm not scared of like, oh, the stick is bent, then I would also notice that my hand is a little bit bent too, and I would say, okay, I don't feel my hand being bent. I should feel some kind of pain. Um, and I noticed that it only happens in water, where there's this sense of something being bent. Um, but then I would be stuck there. I'd be like, there's something in the water that causes me to see to look like my hand is bent, but I don't feel pain, so I'm not sure it's bent. That's as far as I went. And I'm like, the implications of that information still wouldn't be as clear as if now I'm like, I even read that, I'm like, yeah, okay, refraction underwater, yeah, my hand isn't bent, sensory data is valid. But without the scientific knowledge, it's hard for me to see how you'd get to a reasoning process that's like, without just going, okay, there's some kind of data that conflicts. That's my eyes are showing me that my hand is bent underwater. I'm not sure what's.
Um, I'm trying to think of a way to frame it. So you're talking about, well, where do you get the idea that there's something different between an appearance versus what it? No, that's not a good example. Um, it would be something about information, some notion of information that
Well, there's nothing, I couldn't think of anything in another context where I'm like, like it is true that you can imagine a spoon bending and it doesn't bend, right? So okay, my mind doesn't impact things. There is some kind of reality that's out there, if you want to use that description. There's something out there and it's separate from me. And so, I am seeing it, and so, but for whatever reason, just in this context, in water, not that you'd even use the word context, but in water, my hand is bent. So that would be a starting point, that there's something different about underwater, and that it's not actually bent, it just looks bent.
I guess it would be a matter of thinking, to what extent are you given information by your senses? To what extent is what the way things seem to be are literally the same as how things are? To what extent is it there to begin with versus to what extent are you manufacturing it yourself? A different way to think of it, I'm not sure if this would help, but imagine it's almost like a counterfactual sort of thing. Imagine you're controlling you're inside a giant robot and you're controlling it from the inside, and you
Yeah.
drive it and everything. But you can't use your eyes to see. You use something else to take in everything. Like you have some, I don't know, sensors and all that are taking in everything and you're not perceiving anything directly. Like you have your eyes, but you're inside the robot. But you can almost think of that, is that how consciousness is like? Are you inside something perceiving out? And in that sense, you could say, oh yeah, your senses can be wrong because I'm on the inside and I don't know what's necessarily on the outside of the robot. I
Yeah.
just know what's in here inside the robot. And you could say, oh, there's some barrier between my understanding, so the senses might not be valid or true, or that they can be erroneous in some way because the calculations of the robot are doing it wrong. You could say, oh, how do I know the robot's not malfunctioning and I'm not misperceiving something? And that's why I'm coming to these other conclusions. And you could contrast that to thinking, well, what if you are the robot? What if you're not just on the inside, but you are the entire thing? That you are the thing making the calculation, that you are the thing interpreting what's coming in. And this is the best way I can think of to explain it to you in a different way.
And
So
what sounds like that's trying to illustrate some distinction, but what I
yeah,
didn't get.
I'm trying to illustrate the type of problem that this is trying to address, or that why you would need to say your senses are reliable, or are your senses are valid, is that kind of distinction. Because that skepticism comes up when you think, oh, what if my eyes are interpreting things and therefore it's not 100% reliable, or that it's prone to error, or that I don't know what actually is the case 100%. So is my senses could be playing tricks on me, and not only that, but the information itself could be erroneous.
So it sounds like it would be that cool little uh, description of being inside the robot versus the whole thing is like the inside me, that outside reality distinction kind of thing. It's trying, so that's where that's capturing that. If you make that distinction, either you're part of reality or there's the thing there's whatever it is, you inside you, and then there's outside there kind of. Maybe that's what it's capturing.
Yeah, it's hard to bring out exactly why the answer should be satisfactory, because that's more just a way of illustrating how to think of it and
Mm-hmm.
what we're trying to deal with here and why it's a relevant question. I'm not sure. Pre-scientific, that issue may have never came up even. Like if you want the ancient Greeks, you either say, what I'm seeing is how the world is, or it's some magic or some shadow of reality, is how you might think of it.
That's
But
I was just thinking of that. It is interesting because I don't know if they were people back, like for example, in ancient Persian. I don't know if they were even thinking in terms of like senses. Like you said, maybe it was just, this is magic. Just like if you're going walking in the desert and you see a mirage, you're not thinking my senses are deceiving me. Maybe you're just thinking it's just a magical illusion of the gods. I have no idea.
yeah, and through that you could say, oh, I can't use my senses, or my senses can make a mistake, that sometimes they're invalid. And this argument is trying to say, well, we can't really say they're invalid. This is just how they come out. Like, by what standard are you saying it's wrong? How do you know what the perception's supposed to be? What's the stick supposed to look like in water? I mean, it seems like it's just supposed to look like this. Given the nature of our eyes and everything else, that's just how it looks. It might be difficult to understand. It might be really complicated and weird, so you don't know what to say. But just because something's complicated and weird doesn't mean like, oh, that means it's wrong. If you try to explain quantum physics and say that's weird, therefore it's wrong, it's mean, yeah, it might be weird, but if that's how the facts are, you just try to make sense of it. You don't just say, oh, I don't like it, so I must be thinking invalid, or my perception must be invalid. It's just, yeah, it can be strange, and reality can be strange. And the claim being that it's not the senses that are deceiving you. Your senses are working as they ought to. And of course, you can come up with scientific things with science to make you think, well, I'm doubtful there could be some exceptions maybe, but we don't try to come up with theories about perception based on how things fail to operate. We're not going to come up with theory of epistemology based on the few cases where maybe there truly are malfunctions, like with brain damage. We're not trying to deal with a theory that first begins with all the mistakes and try to deal with it. We're trying to deal with how things are, the nature of things. Or we're thinking, what is the nature of perception? Not the nature of perception isn't brain damage or blindness or something, or any other actual malfunction to your brain. I mean, that's a different thing. We're just trying to talk about the nature of perception and the nature of perception, nature of thinking. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, although it's still I guess maybe there is no, I'm thinking of this person without, yeah, like I can read this, and what my whole point of this is I can read this and go, yes, that makes sense. But I'm wondering that if I was, I said pre-scientific, I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever, let's just say an ancient Persian, like, is it even possible for me to reason that way? Like, we're talking about seeing magic, but how could you get to this advanced level of philosophy or thinking where you're like, okay, maybe it's not, maybe that is a thing that I'm seeing and it's not magic and it's like it's not I can just see how you within that, my point is within that context of knowledge, it almost seems like it's a foregone conclusion that you say it's magic and it's completely understandable and you just say yes, my senses deceive me. Because I just couldn't figure out how you get to say, well, the senses are valid, they're showing me the information that's out there. In reality, it's just there's some kind of refraction going on, or like how do you that's my point, is like I can completely get how you would, because I can't figure it out now. So how I get that you wouldn't be able to, well, I would get why someone would come up with magic and be scared of these things, but I also am not sure how you would get, I'm not sure if you can even, anyway, I just don't know the jump that whoever the geniuses of philosophy were came up with to start figuring this stuff out, because it's like, when I just think of it like I'm a person who doesn't know about refraction in the desert and believes in magic. Like, I just don't get how you get out of that, is my point.
I guess the only way to get out of that is your underlying metaphysical premises, like as far as like primacy of existence, things like that are necessary to maybe frame your thinking in a way that you're not just coming up with, oh, it's just magic, or I trust my senses because God made it that way. When you were trying to use information of the world and just, I would say that if the nature of reality is in such a way that your consciousness doesn't create it, doesn't determine what reality is, that you're just thinking of, um, we're just trying to understand the facts as they are. I guess you would need to understand that your consciousness isn't creating reality. And on some level, you're kind of working from that. And if you have that premise, then maybe you could get to here. I mean, it might not be as simple as we'd like it to be, but that's kind of what you would have to reason with. You would start with the premises on like metaphysics, which is why you can have an epistemology without metaphysics. We're not just starting out of nowhere. How do I know things? Well, we have some metaphysical understanding to create such a foundation of epistemology.
How do I know it? It is a thing.
Yeah, I mean, you have to define, well, what is a thing,
Yeah.
or what are facts, generally speaking, and from there you can interpret, well, given this understanding of what facts are, what reality is, and what consciousness is, we would understand that we're not creating reality with our thinking, but on the other hand, that we're also are aware of reality in some way or another. It's just that our perception is just to say we are aware of reality in this way. You could have later information like an understanding once you know what perception is supposed to be and what its function and its nature is. You can say what a failure of perception would be. Say you can know somebody's has brain damage, and that can cause the nature of perception to malfunction because you're broken in a literal sense. You've got brain damage and you're not, you know, to begin with why it's malfunctioning. You could say because it's the nature of consciousness has been broken in some way or another.
Okay.
So you can't claim that the senses are invalid until you already know what is valid in the first place.
But okay, well that's interesting because how would that then apply to someone who let's go with this ancient Persian who believes in the magic of Horokanda or whatever. How would like in that case, what would it mean? Because he's saying the senses are not reliable, but I don't know if he has a like I think you just said something like in order to say the senses are invalid, you need to have some view of what being valid is. But that guy doesn't have any view of what the senses being valid are.
Well, I guess that just goes into the problem of you need to define your premises better. I mean, he's just kind of maybe a vague notion of truth and all that. That he has some idea, but that would almost illustrate why you need philosophy because it could help illustrate his own points and he could make his own case of why that's true. But I think on some level, you would need reason to just go through this. Maybe on some level, yeah, if you're pre-scientific, even pre-philosophy, yeah, you won't get there. You won't find the answer. You'll just have these. You're kind of getting at the answer, but you're not really there yet. That
Yeah.
sort of thing would be going on.
I mean, what I wrote, excuse me, what I wrote down for this is I don't have an answer, and it's I think it's one that depends on a few things. So historical context and then philosophical history as well. Like if you have a good knowledge of the development of the field in different cultures and what it was like to live like an ancient Persian or someone who believed in magic, you might get to a better you might be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes better and go, okay, well, here is how you could potentially reason without being dependent on science or what exact philosophical premises you'd need in order to get to the point of not, being able to go, okay, there's something here that needs to be investigated. So anyway, in short, I don't have an answer, but I can see how the answer actually depends. You could probably figure it out, but it would depend on a lot of philosophical history and then history in general in that kind of context.
Yeah, I mean, there are philosophical discoveries. It's not like the answers are always there. I mean,
Yeah,
it does take thousands of years to come to these understandings, and even
crazy,
philosophically.
crazy.
Yeah,
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 but it
but
is interesting because
that
it's
is a
like
good
so
way
much
to.
we take for granted, right?
Yeah,
You're like, oh, I know this, I'm so smart, but actually, no, you're not. You're not that smart.
yeah, I think it is a good way to think of it by thinking, what if I were an ancient Persian? How would
Yeah,
I go about this? Or what would I even be able to do, even if I were like an absolute genius? What could I do? If you were
yeah, that is
Aristotle,
interesting.
like just pretend if you were Aristotle, how would you come up with it? I mean, he made plenty of scientific mistakes and almost comical ones by today's standards, but he had the premises in a way that there's some understanding of the senses that they tell you things reliably. And there's all sorts of theories within philosophy about how to deal with sense perception, ranging from complete skepticism to that your senses are reliable. I mean, it's a range of belief.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Anyway, I don't know. I think I forgot. Oh, I was going to say, actually, going back to what you were saying about Aristotle, wouldn't the ultimate form of empathy be if you were able not only to just have some general idea of people you live with in the current culture and what they're thinking and feeling, but if you could go back in time and go, oh, okay, wow, that's an amazing discovery because you have an appreciation for the context and the kind of premises you'd hold and what that would be like. That would be like next level empathy.
I think so, because you have to think about even what their way of thinking is and appreciating what they didn't have compared to you, what knowledge they couldn't have had. You could appreciate even more what it is they figured out. I mean, it's easy to take for granted what Aristotle did in today's standards. Like, oh yeah, we know that there's not this energy pulling along things as they fly through the air. I mean, that would almost be comical and ridiculous.
Right.
But if you think about given what he had, which
Yep.
science didn't even exist, he basically invented science in a way,
Yeah.
and he came up with logic. I mean, that's a major step in
Yeah.
even figuring any of this out.
Yeah, and appreciating it is hard though. And then same with the going just to let's say a regular ancient Persian merchant getting into anyone's head and being able to imagine what philosophical premises you'd hold and how they would play out and what options you'd actually have for thinking. That's anyway, that's I just thought that's like next level empathy, but it's pretty
It
cool to be able to
is.
do that. Okay, let's go to the next thing. You did bring this up briefly about the different theories about perception. So I was going to ask about the mirror theory of perception. I don't know if you remember what that is. So if you don't, we'll just skip it. But it was something like, I don't know if it's the same thing as naive realism. To be honest, I don't remember the details of a lot of them. But the mirror theory was like your consciousness is a mirror, and so it's like just reflecting. It's like this thing that just reflects and it has no identity itself. It just sort of receives information about the world. Do you remember that at all?
No,
No?
but I do know what it's getting at, what you're
Okay.
describing. I mean, it sounds like in one sense um, it sounds like it's a passive reception of information that's reflected onto you. Actually, I probably shouldn't answer it because I don't know
Okay. Yeah,
the
that's fine.
context. I'll
We'll leave
skip it.
it. Yeah, that's cool. Let's leave it. Okay, let me just go through this quickly. I'm highlighting it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about but I was like, all right, does this play out in it? Like, can you think of a specific? This is talking about Kant's epistemology, I guess, which I don't know. I can't say I really fully got what that was about, but what can you think of anything you know that it impacts? Like, I'm just wondering, wow, does this thing actually have like consequences?
Well, this view here, I think I want to say it's almost exaggerating Kant. Like, I don't quite agree with how bad he thinks Kant is,
Hmm.
but the error, yeah, it's an error, I would say. He's pointing out here. This is more like the when I'm talking about the robot, when I say you're inside controlling it, but then the robot itself keeps interpreting things, and you're just in the middle of it all. And that's kind of the Kantian view that the reality as it is outside the robot, and the reality that you're aware of is just with your eyes looking through the robot. That there's like a veil in between you and reality, and that's the sort of thing the Kantian way of looking at that is. That there's some your senses are like an in between reality and consciousness, and that because they're interpreting something, there's a barrier between you and reality.
So maybe a consequence might be you'd get really into psychedelics because you'd be like, I need to go inside myself or go to another
In
dimension
a way,
where things are
yes.
true. I mean, I'm just trying to come up with
Yeah, I
examples.
mean, that's one thing. I mean, in some way, psychedelics and the philosophy around that is that kind of thing, that you're being in touch with the world as it really is, and you're overcoming that barrier between, and not that Kant would say that, but that kind of viewpoint that there's a barrier between reality and what we perceive. And you
Yeah,
just want to be in touch with reality, like the true reality. So you take
right.
drugs, or you might say that, oh, we can't really know anything, so it doesn't matter because my perceptions are unreliable. Or it doesn't have to go that extreme. It could just be that, oh, we need other methods to think besides perception, or perception can't be the foundation of knowledge. It might not be that, oh, perception's worthless, but it can't be the foundation of knowledge. And you could see what problems that would lead to, because, or why that would be conflicting with
Well, I can't, to
everything
be
in
honest, I
consciousness.
can't. Like, I get that it's an error, but it's not so easy for me to go, okay, well, here's a consequence, here's another one, here's another, I don't know.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, I'll spell it out better then. Say, then you have, say you're not trusting your senses, or saying that the information might be, oh, what's that sound?
Oh, I'm making tea,
Oh,
sorry. I'll mute for a bit, go on.
okay. So I'm saying that, say you have this barrier between, but your perception might not be reliable, and it could even be prone to error because of this barrier in between everything. So you might go on to say that, well, I need to use pure reason, or reason on its own, to know what true facts are, or I can't go with necessarily reality itself, but rather I can only use logic in itself, or reason in itself, to come up with any answer for certain. And it'd be like Descartes, he was saying, like, I can doubt everything, and the only thing I can't doubt is my own existence, that I think, therefore I am. And that's, it would kind of lead to that sort of thing also, I think, that you couldn't really be sure of your senses, so you'd have to use reason on its own, and just use reason as your foundation rather than perception or reality itself, or something about reason. Does that help?
Yeah, it's still abstract, but that's okay.
It is.
I think that maybe what's required, sorry, I'm still just making some mint tea. Um, I think, I was thinking like, okay, well, maybe it might mean something like if you're making a very difficult choice, rather than trying a lot of little things, you might kind of be more inclined to just stay at home and think like not think through it, but reflect and constantly try seek and the answer from within. But that's still vague because I'd need to have more knowledge of
Yeah.
philosophy to make the direct connection. But I was trying to look for those kind of like actual, all right, inner psychology. Like if we make a character in a book, like if we were writing a book called Epistemology for house parties, or something like that. How would we make the characters? That's sort of what I'm getting at. But I don't have enough. I can
Yeah,
see
that
how
would be
it's like
tricky.
super difficult. Yeah.
That would
Um,
be.
But you know what I did find, this is slightly off topic, but I told you this Japanese book called Musashi, and
Yes.
there are bits in there where obviously it's not, the book isn't philosophical in nature, but there's definitely like specifics of things we've discussed. Like there's this wandering priest who's like cursing himself and hitting his head on the wall because he's trying to get rid of the delusions of the like his sexual energy. Like he's trying to expel his delusions, and there's this conflict like, oh, I still have it, I'll have it forever, and I shouldn't have, and there's all these scenes like that where it's exactly captures some of the things we've discussed, like mind body dichotomy, which is pretty cool. So I know it's possible, it's just hard.
Yeah. It definitely is difficult. And
But isn't that
Yeah.
what isn't like if you're studying philosophy, isn't that what the ultimate goal is? Like otherwise you just kind of, you know, you're what is it? You're manipulating symbols.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. I mean, it's important to really understand it. I mean, it's good to ask these questions. There is a lot of depth to it. I mean, I will say about Zoni's Peikoff and Rand is that I think when it comes to history of philosophy, according to about some philosophers, I think they don't quite get the right conclusion about what that philosopher is saying.
Yeah.
And I could get the essence of what Rand or Peikoff might be saying. I mean, this is arguing against, in general, that identity is invalid or that the identity and nature of your perception is what makes it difficult to come into contact with reality. I mean, it's more something you'll understand over time
Yeah.
of why these questions matter.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I can see some of that, but just not enough
yeah,
context. And I've also got to be motivated. This is why, like, otherwise, what's the point of me studying it if it's like it doesn't actually result in anything at all?
yeah. I
Um,
mean, I should say this still interests me as a topic. I
yeah,
like talking about perception and hallucinations and how do I know what our senses are valid. I mean, even once I understand, there's still so much to say and ask and question to say on it, even
yeah.
beyond just here. Just it's a very deep area of philosophy that still gets a lot of thinking. So you're in good company, I guess, to say that if you have a lot of questions, well, many people do.
Um, let's see what this.
Choice to
Ah,
focus.
this one because I skipped the Immanuel Kant one and I went to at the other end of the extreme of the continuum is the man to whom everything beyond the sensory perceptual level is a blur. An example would be a drunk who's passed out. Um, anyway, so it goes on to describe this mental state. But I don't know anyone who like do people like that exist? Because I don't know them. I like if you're drunk, yeah, but uh, maybe I'm not good at empathy because what like I haven't met. I'm not aware of anyone being like that. Um, and so it's interesting to me because if that is the case, then my understanding of people is not very good. Uh, there's like, as in, not, it's not that it's not very good. There are elements missing that would make me much better at understanding people if I could see that there is such a spectrum that's like concepts become a blur because I just assume everyone thinks like I do. Um, And so yeah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this at all. This is again, this is more like what are the psychological um manifestations? What do they look like? So it's not again, it's probably not philosophy anymore, but it's, that would be important if you're studying this because otherwise again, this is all just words.
I mean, that can illustrate what it means to be in a blur is a state of drunkenness is what he means by in a blur and kind of passive and drifting, which you
But
can even
more than that
observe.
too. Look, I've
Yeah,
highlighted, yeah,
passive drifting, oblivious to considerations like truth.
ordered. The mind of such an individual is not active or goal-directed, is passive, drifting, dazed, oblivious to considerations like truth, clarity, context, or methodology. It merely experiences random stimuli, outer or inner, without self-awareness, continuity, or purpose. Yes, you can substitute a drunk for that, but beyond that, it sounds like he's saying, yeah, uh, the mental state of many people who have not taken a drop to distinguish. To drink is often indistinguishable in the respect here relevant from the one just described. And that perked my interest because I don't know anyone like that.
Yeah, I can't give a really good, yeah, a good explanation of that. But I don't like it very much either, the way he's describing that, because it's not as if, I mean, you take a drop and then, or it's not as though people are easily even fit into that way of thinking. I can think of individual instances where I think a person was oblivious to considerations, and that I could say they weren't really focused or and in that sense, I could say, yeah, I've observed a person maybe uninterested in thinking, or if I tell somebody might say I think too much, and that's to me that's a bit of a haze. Or when somebody says, like, I've heard of people describing when they first try meditation that they almost feel afraid of their own thoughts, not even afraid, but that it doesn't make them feel good. They feel bad. They think of think of they feel like their attention's all over the place. They feel like they can't maintain their attention. That's the closest thing I can come up with. Where if you're not focused and clear, you start to have all these flowing thoughts that might not even seem rational. It's the closest example I can think
Okay.
of what a better example than Peacock was giving, I think. Because I mean, it's interesting when you hear about people who don't meditate or people who try to meditate and they feel like they're doing it wrong or whatever. They think they're just thinking about, like, they can't focus, they can't be where they want their mind to be. And it might not be experiencing random stimuli, but there's a kind of chaos in a way that when they're trying to focus their mind, it's like they never experienced it before. Like there's a new clarity after that too.
There's three things I can think of based on what you said. So one is, the meditation. I think like, okay, this is a separate thing. They're all separate points. But so with meditation, isn't that the point where you have these like that's what your mind is in when you don't focus it, and even when you try to focus it and it's in like you're focusing on your breathing, it does just put out all these random associations, and it is passive and drifting and dazed. You can feel it. I don't know if it's dazed, but it is. I mean, I experience that. There are times when I'm focused, and then
Right.
even if I meditate and focus on breath, my mind still throws drifting elements at me. It's throwing all this associational stuff. So that's the point of meditation, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, imagine you didn't have the focus on your breathing, then you just have that chaos in a way
Okay.
that you need focus on something. I mean, you could focus on the nature of concepts or what it is about those ideas if you want to think about them. Like, right, you got to focus on something in order to figure those things out and work through those issues or even accomplish what you want to.
Um, that was the one thing about the comment on meditation. And then two, I think as you were speaking, I think I realized like, okay, maybe I can sort of see, we can come close to approximating what a person like this would look like. Um, they would, their mind would be throwing a lot of random associations at them. And that would be, I don't know really how you'd manage to, like, you have to think a little bit, like, you can't not think at all, but
Right.
you'd way more often be in that state of random associations and not like a directed thought process. Um, yeah, maybe that would be something. I still can't quite. I mean, because I'm there sometimes. I definitely drift a lot of the time. But I can sort of see, not very concretely, but I can sort of see it would be more of that, basically, more of the drifting, random associations. But
Yeah.
I don't know anyone. I haven't spoken to many people where I'm like, this is what this psychology will be like. So
Yeah, I think this claim is almost too strong. I understand Peikoff is talking about an extreme example on purpose,
yeah,
but it's hard to even think of even damaged people who think this way. I mean,
yeah,
maybe on some level they want to not think, and you could understand the consequences of not thinking and not focusing, but is it in this way? Does not focusing mean merely experiencing random stimuli without self-awareness, continuity, or purpose? I mean, we could ask that. I mean, is it this way? Is it the way he's describing? It's hard to say, but we can say that focus isn't automatic. It's a choice. It's a thing you opt to do. It doesn't happen merely because you're walking around. I mean, you could even tell from meditation that focus is not going to happen unless you try to do it. It's just to be a deliberate process. And then once you do, you can think more clearly than you did. What is it like to think before then? Well, there's probably a huge variety of ways to think. You might have to read Dostoevsky to really know, because Dostoevsky gets into things like this.
Into things like what a
Like,
dazed state.
yes, Dostoevsky would write things like that. But I'm not coming up with any examples. You might need a creative mind like his to know, or think of people like that.
Yeah, I think you're right on Dostoevsky because I have read some of his books. Some of them are too hard for me, but I have read some. And then you can the classic example of being drunk I've seen, and then also I've just in the book that I'm reading now, there's some examples of it, but less so of the sober person in that state. So that's interesting. The other point that I wanted to talk about based off what you said off meditation, or you said before meditation, some people who say, I think too much or something like that. I've heard that too, the overthinking. The overthinking. I think what people are describing is because I've experienced that we can go back to the empathy with the ancient Persian or whatever, because what it's capturing, I think, is when when your thought process isn't effective, and you feel like it's just not effective, and it's just torturing you because it's not effective. So you almost don't know how to think about the problem, because I've experienced that too, when I would describe it as overthinking. But it's more like experiencing thought as torturous because it's just heaps of dead ends and maybe arbitrary claims. If you want me to use if I'm using the stuff I just learned from OPA, it's arbitrary. There's all these arbitrary start points for the thought, and then it's all just torture basically. So I think that's what that captures.
I do think many people want to mean that, but more recently I started to wonder if they really do mean thinking, not just thinking too much about bad ideas, but they blame the thinking on it, not just thinking poorly about a topic.
No, it's the same thing though. I think it's a mistake they're making though, because I don't think that they.
Okay.
I think it's both of them together, meaning it's not that they are blaming the thinking, but it's because I think most of the time, if I want to be benevolent, because this is how I am, it's a mistake. There's just not, you don't know that the thinking, you don't know where it's going wrong, so you just think it's just causing you trouble, and you do think it is the thinking. So you kind of that's what I think, but I don't know. So
we agree then. That's what I was trying to say, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you generalize from one instance of having trouble with something and not able to think it through, it makes sense that you go, well, thinking isn't good. You have to, you kind of jump to something else. Have you read, what was the book? Oscar Wilde wrote a book about, the theme was mortality, and it was about this young, you probably, if you don't know it, if I've mentioned Oscar Wilde and you don't know it, then you probably haven't read it.
I know his name, but
Portrait of Dorian Gray. That was it.
I never read that, but I mean, I've heard it referenced many times.
Okay, well, this loosely ties into what we're discussing, because it made me appreciate how easy it is to misgeneralize. You can go, okay, I can't think this through, so all thinking is bad. But it's a mistake still. It's not that the person's trying to come up with some devious plan. It's literally just a mistake in their thinking that they then. Yeah. Anyway, so that's. Okay, let's go to the next
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is about the drifters. Let's see. This is the sermon against drifters. So, and then I've got some questions about that. If a drifter in a given situation apprehends dimly or clearly the need to initiate a thought process, yet refuses to do so, the refusal involves an evasion. He is evading the fact that a thought is necessary. To be out of the focus, therefore, does not as such imply that one has evaded, but to be out of focus in situations where one must make decisions or take action does imply it. It implies an evasion of one's need of consciousness in indecision and action. So it's like, all right, well, let me just think about myself. Um, if I'm reading something hard like this, like OFA, and then I get stuck or I just feel a bit overwhelmed, and then I'm like, all right, I just randomly quickly hop on to like check my email or something. Is that evasion or is that drift?
It can be. Um, I guess I have to think more about the context. We have to wonder things like yeah, maybe that feeling or thought will come up and you're aware of it, but then at some point you need to decide, do I engage it or not? I may have had this thought, or I may have even started the motions to do it. But once you're aware of it, that you've made that these thoughts have appeared, then you can make a choice to stop doing it. Or at least on some level you're acknowledging that you started to do something, but now you can, or started to think about something you could think about, then deciding, do I continue doing this? Is there actually some reason to keep doing this? I mean, am I wanting to do this for a reason? Or am I actually avoiding thinking about something else? It's hard to say exactly.
Okay.
Maybe in general, sure, it could be evasion. It's hard to say at what level is it that you're chosen to evade or not, but as soon as you realize that you should make another decision or don't like your decision or realize that you're thinking of something else just to avoid thinking of another thing, that would be evasion. And it's not necessarily like you think of it in terms of sin, you've evaded, therefore you must repent. I mean, okay, if you've evaded, you made a mistake. It's bad for your life. Now just fix it and just do better. It's not that you've committed some heinous crime. Maybe it is that you've evaded. What are you going to do about it? Like, are you going to
Uh,
say, oh, my bad, I realize I'm having a bad habit, or I need to fix this habit, or whatever? That'd be almost acknowledging it. Yeah, I've evaded, but I'm taking it honestly and seriously now, and I will take this. I will judge the facts and act appropriately.
Okay, so what interests me then is we can tie a couple of things into that, but let's not do that right now. So I could tie habits into what you said, but let's
Right.
I mean the thing that interests me then is the need. So he needs to recognize. So what I'm getting is that, like in my example, let's say I formed a habit of, okay, I'm stuck on this problem or I feel overwhelmed, so I will go and do something anything that's distracting. That could be, clean the dishes, or it could be check my email, whatever. In that case, that's probably more well, it's really tricky because it depends on the need. So that could be more just drifting. Like that's my automatic functioning when I get stuck. I do this thing and I just let go of focus. And well, actually, I don't know because focus is a thing you don't like. It's not habit, so that doesn't work. Um, what does it mean to like? What does it apprehend the need? Like, at what point is it a need to initiate a thought process? Like, you have to. Then that ties into a lot. Like, I need
It
to think,
does.
and I've got to actively refuse and push it away. So, uh,
I maybe here's an example I could think of. Imagine you've had an issue with a friend. They owe you money or something, they didn't pay you back, and you keep putting it off, but you can at some level see like, yeah, you need your friend to pay it back, and you need to engage in thinking about it to figure it out. You like there's a need to initiate a thought process about it in that sense. Like you want to accomplish something, so well, there's a need to think about it.
Yeah.
But then you can say, oh, I don't want to think about it. It's too painful to think about losing the friendship, or it's too painful to think about offending them, or I don't want to even think about anything that could harm the friendship. And you can say, oh, I'm not going to think about it. And that's the kind of evasion I think is maybe more along the lines of what Peacock is trying to describe here. I mean, I don't know if I'd say drifter. I don't know if that's a good choice here, but as far as a person that could recognize something matters, and how they recognize or whatnot, that's kind of beside the point. But if you do recognize that something needs to be done, or you say, oh, I need to think about that, you shouldn't just then decide, oh, but that would be painful, so I'm not going to do it.
Right. So, I mean, yes, that's what it says, apprehend. So you've got to apprehend, recognize that there's a need to think about it, but then actively refuse to do so. Then it's an evasion. I push it away. I don't want to think about it. But then, okay, but then in that case, if I am out of focus in a situation where I've said like, okay, I want to read this book for an hour and it's a really hard book, and I just keep going out of focus, like that is evasion, isn't it? Because in this case, I have apprehended the need to work to solve the problems or like gain the insights from the book. But it feels like it's automatic. Like I might just automatically check my email. In that case, I would say that would fit into evasion because I am apprehending that. I mean, I'm there for a reason, right? And I said, I want to study this. This is my goal. And then that I don't see how, like I wanted to say originally that was drift, but then now that if I'm going with this strict definition, then it does seem like that would be evasion.
Well,
and like I said, I'm not castigating myself. I'm just looking for a cycle. I'm just trying to get a concretization of what this means.
I think we could say there's a range of evasion here for one. I mean, you could have more severe cases. And in this case, you're giving an example of it's hard to say because you could recognize that you drifted. You got that point. Then you think about, well, if you keep drifting and drifting, you probably would want to think, well, why am I doing this? Am I tired? Do I need a break? Am I not remembering things well? Or whatever it might be, you can recognize, oh, there's some actual problem here, so I should stop. I'm wasting my time, and I just got to take a break. I need it. I know it's important to think about this, but I'm also recognizing the fact that I'm having some other issue right now I need to figure out, or maybe not even figure out, just take a break. Yeah, I mean, I think drift just could be just something that happens. Because, I mean, that's how your mind works sometimes. There's random thoughts just to keep your awareness and just keep thinking and keep your mind going, at least to some extent. I mean, that's there. But the evasion would come in. It's like, oh, I just drift, so I don't know, I don't care anymore. You're not actually thinking about like, oh, I'm tired or something like that. You felt the drift and it's like, oh, I don't care anymore. And that would be more like evasion, I would say. But I mean, we're talking about this deliberate avoidance of thinking in the manner of that you don't even want to, like you're just throwing things aside.
That makes more sense. There's more complexity to this than which makes it real. The reason I'm kind of getting at this is one, so I can have specific references in my mind. Okay, that instance, that would have been drift, that would have been evasion. But so I know that in this it talks about I'm not sure if it's this chapter, but it is this chapter, volition, like that focus is something we choose. Then how does that drifting fit in? Like if drifting is something that just happens and it tells you you're tired, like isn't the whole point that the focus is like we're volitional? Are you saying sometimes we're not, like we don't have, or no, I don't, anyway, this is hard. I don't fully get,
it is hard.
Yeah, because your example makes sense if you can drift, but then if you're still going like, okay, am I tired? Am I this? Then you're not evading. that's what, like, that makes it's more subtle and it makes sense to me, but that also complicates my thinking on this.
It would complicate thinking because, like, yeah, what do you say about drifting anyway? Is focus not actually important? I mean, is a choice to focus not anything actually going on? I mean, is that just a distraction to make us feel good that we're in control? But I mean, I don't think it's any of those things. But to answer that, I would say that it's not to say that there's not distractions. It's not to say that your mind doesn't feed a stream of consciousness sometimes. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But you wouldn't want to call it thinking in the usual sense, like I'm deliberating. I mean, yes, thoughts is things occurring to you and whatnot. But if you want to think further or more or focus or accomplish something, you need to focus it.
Do you think the drifting is capturing that associational element of our mind that is maybe habit-based? Yeah?
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But
No,
it's
me
not
neither.
focus, that's for sure.
Okay, cool. So
and
then
you can't really accomplish something. You need to direct it in some manner.
okay, well that's the key then, right? So the focus is still one characteristic, if I want to use this stuff. One characteristic of focus is definitely associational based, habit based, but it's directed, whereas a drift would be associational based, habit based, but not directed, I guess.
I'm using the word drift as in a natural way that your mind goes off track sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that in the more natural way. That it happens and not a big deal.
Natural.
And then, well, I mean, natural is it just happens. There's nothing weird or strange or different causing it to happen. It just does.
Yeah.
You don't need to be drinking. You don't need to be in a bad mood. You don't need nothing. It's just, it happens. And I would say that making associations is fine. I mean, that's kind of what drift is. It's your mind is creating these associations as they occur. It's like the computer's on. It's just but it can never stop. It's just like a shark. They can't stop swimming, otherwise they die. So even when they're not like doing anything, they still swim. So it's like that. It's like your mind still has to go. It needs to be.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah,
and
that's
then,
like, yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean it's still cranking, but then you have to direct your thinking further to say, well, now I want to accomplish something. Like, what am I going to do with these thoughts? What am I going to get to? You could just say, well, I'm just going to keep drifting and just go based off of these associations, and that's that, and not focus anywhere. It's just, I've got the associations, but I'm not focusing on anything. Well, or even avoiding focusing on anything. Well, that'd be just drifting. You'll just, any action that's good is you just got lucky. If anything bad happens, you got unlucky. It's just, there's nothing you can really do. It's just the only difference of not, evasion would be both recognizing that you have thoughts occurring to you, but then also at the same time refusing to focus and create a goal beyond that. We want goal-oriented thinking, and that's what focus is, kind of. You're creating a goal. That's what directs your thinking and standards in which you can judge things as true or false or valid or not.
Yeah. And I was thinking a couple of things. So one is you just said where it's like we're always swimming. I was doing some meditation like 2 days ago, and they often talk about like the mind being a machine, and it just produces thoughts. That's how they describe it, but and it's sort of similar. And also the analogy of like it's like your brain or your mind is always idle. So as soon as you wake up, it's in idle. So the engine is working, but if you want to go somewhere, you need to, what is it when you go from idle to, you need to put it in gear and then just choose where you want to go. But otherwise it's just going to sit there and idle and use up fuel.
Yeah, you don't want to be idling when you're living your life. I mean, I mean, there could be points in time where you're not focusing, but it's not necessarily like an evasion. It's just you might need just to rest a moment and just focus on just existing, if that even makes sense. But you don't need to be like a ninja. That's the way how I think of it. Like,
Yeah.
don't evade doesn't mean be a ninja. Just um, focus to accomplish your goals. Be a goal-oriented living being. Like, if your nature is to the rational animal and you need reason as your means of survival, then it's a matter of always being goal-oriented towards life. If you have to always have that goal in mind, at the very least, and that can also be what tells you what to focus on and what not to focus on. And once you've chosen to focus, you can focus on like your nature, and your nature would say, well, your nature is to be goal directed, and you need to be selecting goals and recognizing those and directing your activities and actions. And you might take breaks sometimes, but it doesn't mean you've stopped going towards that goal. You're still keeping in mind that once in a while you need to bring focus on certain different things at different times.
How does this fit in with choice being volitional and not choice, sorry, focus? Because you gave the example and it makes sense to me of like if you keep losing focus, you need to ask, are you tired, or maybe you need a break, or maybe you can't study this much, or whatever. But if in any given moment, if focus is something I choose, then technically, as soon as I lose focus, then I've chosen to go not focus. Does that? I'm trying to square it with that the fact of there's biology as well, and we do get tired. But then I'm not sure how that all fits together. Like maybe most of the time we are volitional, and then some of the time we just get too tired and our minds don't function anymore, or like there's a certain I don't know. Because I think you're right. Like definitely, if I'm more tired, I'll lose focus more. But then the question is that then like if there's a correlation between me being tired and me losing focus more, then would that not suggest that there's a non-volitional element in it too?
Um, in a sense, we could call the drifting non-volitional. It just occurs. Um, I guess I could come up with all kinds of psychological explanations, but I'll avoid doing that because I want to think about the philosophical nature of this question.
Yeah.
What does it mean about your choice of focus if sometimes you lose focus? What did it mean that you fail to choose to focus if you're just drifting? And I don't know. So we can think of focus as something you're definitely choosing to do. But I don't know if ending it necessarily means you've chosen to stop focusing, because you could have finished thinking about a particular train of thought.
Oh, okay.
And it could
Yeah.
give you, there's a
Yeah.
break
Okay.
in between the like, I mean, it's not like you're going to be always in control of every single second of every single thought and you're just going to direct every
Yeah.
single moment. But when you're having thoughts, like,
Why
oh, like,
not?
you just got to like just recognize that, oh, I've reached the end of my train of thought now, move on to something else. I know for me, that's when the transition from one activity to another is when I'm more prone to not do what I want to do or what I know I should do in those moments. So in a way, it could be like evasion. It's hard to say if it is or not exactly, but I do know I could be aware of it. And once I'm aware of it, yeah, I should like go on to the next thought and or maybe plan ahead for my expectation that I'm going to have this little issue or this gap in between. Because
That's
I
a it's
could
a,
see that.
Yeah, it's a good identification. I didn't think about it, but you're right. I also recognize that now that you're saying that. Like, there's you might have a train of thought, or in the transitions, it's much easier to lose focus. Or if I don't know if lose focus, yeah, I mean, you're finished, you're focused, and now you're in your default state, you're in idle, and so you have to choose to reinitiate. And that's also where I noticed myself tripping up. Like, it's funny you say that, because like after this session, usually after I study philosophy and then I start working, I go for a run and like gym or something just to, like refresh in a
Yeah.
way. But in that transition, sometimes I definitely get caught up in other just bullshit because I'm like, oh, I just can't be bothered, or just it's a default thing. I don't know, something comes up and then it might takes me like 10 minutes, whereas I've got my running shoes on now, so theoretically I should just bolt out the house as soon as I'm done. But it's
Yeah.
always in the transitions. So now that you've made that identification, you're right. Like I can see that. You're right. That is super interesting because it's like it's not like okay, study, that whole thing is focus. It's more like in this period, I set up, let's say, an hour to study in the morning because I'm studying this stuff now in the morning, early in the morning. And so, but each within that, there'll be little, like that decision to study is okay, focus. Okay, now study. All right, that's done. Now I've got to reinitiate focus. You're saying there's like little incremental processes, and once that's done, you've got to then reinitiate.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't think it's necessarily wrong that you can drift a bit after in between. I think there's some value in just letting things drift a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the choice of focus doesn't mean, I don't know if I even interpret it as a moral need to focus, only that you do need to choose to focus. But it's not saying that in every moment you must be in this focusing, deliberate state. I'm not sure what Rand would say about that. And I feel like I don't know how she would answer that. But I do want to say that if you can initiate these different thoughts, that occasionally let some drift is appropriate. Because it's not that you've chosen to stop thinking, it's just that sometimes you can rest yourself or even go to this just state of being rather than focusing. I mean, there could be advantages to that, but you're not living in a state or a life of zen and absentness. It's just like there's transition stages and you can keep going and you can
Yeah. No.
up your
Continue.
focus and you can increase the focus and lower it sometimes. And it's not necessarily wrong to do that.
So yeah, you're right. It is interesting. We'll cover it more in ethics too, because I remember having some issues with the quotes in the
Yeah.
virtues on rationality, like fully focused at all times, something like that. But we'll definitely get into more of the moral aspect of that when we cover some more ethics. But what did I want to say? Uh, Yeah, I mean, there was a section even in OPA that was like, if you make a decision to go get groceries or walk down the street and you have a goal on the way there, you can drifting is fine. It doesn't, the
Yeah.
instruction, it says something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember something like that in OPA. And then, but that might conflict a little bit with my interpretation of the virtues written in Ayn Rand's The Selfishness thing, but we can discuss that in the ethics stuff we do
Yeah.
because
And
I still haven't gotten to that.
yeah, I think it's fine to question that, even doubt that he's even right on that. You could even never agree with him on this point, but I think you could get the basic idea of what objectivism is saying and what its unique premise is or its unique conclusion is. And this attention to focus is pretty unique as far as
Mhm.
Western philosophy, as far as I understand. And you could look at it that way, and that there's these considerations that are important to make that other philosophers might not make in the same way. That's how I see the value of this, even if we disagree in exactly the way Peikoff is arguing about focus. We can still understand this goal-oriented nature, long-term action, rationality as the means of survival. Within that context, we can find something very agreeable with this, I think, or that there's value in what Peikoff is saying because of understanding goal-directed action and the point of active thinking rather than passive reaction.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's sections. I think it's covered later, so I don't want to get into it too much now. As in, it's covered in objectivity and reason, those chapters. But There is a lot about like I thought I was going to ask about actual thought process and how that does require an active directed focus because you need to recall um, like if I'm thinking about what I want to do, I have to sometimes invoke memories because they're the building blocks of the premises of, let's say, a logical conclusion I might make. So I have to go, okay, is this true or not? Or like, let me just think, maybe I can come up with a good concrete example. All right, let's say I'm making a decision to move overseas. I need to like I can't just sit in front of Google. Like I've got to recall facts. Like, okay, what is my goal? And then I've got to get my subconscious to throw at me, oh, that was that thing I thought about then. Or like, what was my experience in that city? Oh, then does that fit in with what I want? You know what I'm saying? Like there's this process of using that machinery to then, but you've got to direct it. You've got to be like, tell me that a time that this and this happened, and then that's how you build your logical statements. So it must be active.
Yeah, that is what I mean by active.
Yeah.
That sort
Okay.
of thing.
All
And
right.
that we can't come to that reason is the way we do that. Like you have to direct your thinking, direct towards your goals. That you can't even end up at a goal without directing your thinking.
Do you remember we had a conversation? I wonder if I'm getting invisible. Do you remember I'm just going into my library to get the right book. Uh, do you remember we had a conversation a while ago about um, what was it about? It was about the naming things, and you were telling me about people who've had trauma or PTSD and the process of therapy for that, and like how naming something brings it to the forefront of consciousness. Do you
Yeah.
remember that comment? Yeah.
Yes.
Would you say not naming then is an evasion? Like if I choose, like I'm just trying to have, so then I can go, oh, now this is evasion, this is not evasion, because I don't know if I fully have that. Do you reckon is that evasion if I don't name something?
I think so. It in a way it could be hard. Well, the nature of PTSD is that it's not like the memories are always there. They're there a lot. In a way, in that context, and like not focusing could at least maybe serve a function. But it's really hard to say because, like I was saying before, we don't necessarily come up with the principles of epistemology based on the broken example. Like you're not going to come up with a theory of perception based on what brain damaged patients do. In the same way, you wouldn't come up with the principle of ethics based on what somebody going through PTSD would go through, because there's something really actually traumatic that happened. And you could say that things might change for them because of this traumatic illness that's actually causing damage. So it's hard to say, is it evasion? Maybe in
No,
some sense,
No,
but
I agree. It's
yeah,
too an extreme an example because I know that like high levels of emotions. I think there was research done on this. They actually shut down our thought.
yes.
So then you're
But
right. It wouldn't be a good example.
it is interesting to note that their therapy is gradually bringing focus to it in a safe way that they don't
Yeah.
shut down, like gradually being able to focus. And then the problem is reduced, that you need focus to treat PTSD. It's like it's not more hiding away, it's receiving like the clinical support so that you can safely identify it.
Yeah, that was the idea behind this research into psychedelics. They allow you to then focus on the memories and then go through a talk-based conversation about. I mean, but that's a different. Yeah, I agree. It's a bad example. But then what about naming things for like just not without PTSD, but just like, is that if I don't name, like, what to not name something, is that, did we have any examples that weren't extreme? I can't remember.
No, I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
he came up with Harry Potter with Voldemort, I think.
Yeah, he who
He
shall
who
not be
must,
named.
yeah, I mean, that would be obvious evasion. But I mean, I
Yeah.
can't think of any lesser examples. It could be, maybe like when only example I can think of is say if you have a family gathering and nobody wants to say negative things about Uncle Joe or something, like, and you're just not really saying it, not saying the nature of his creepiness or whatever. If you had a creepy uncle, like that could be a neat sense of evasion by not naming or even avoiding talking about it, like the elephant in the room in a way. Like that could
Oh
be seen
yeah,
as
okay.
evasion.
Yeah, so maybe evasion, one characteristic of evasion could be not naming something, intentionally not naming it when you apprehend it, meaning that I guess there's an emotional reaction that comes first. There's some kind of lightning quick identification that's made, and so if you then disconnect from that and don't name it, then that would be, I mean, that's one way evasion may play out.
Yeah, or
Um,
you could recognize aspects of say a mental health problem. I mean, I'm trying to avoid like drugs as an extreme, but just like
yeah, of
any
course.
mental health problem, like oh, you notice somebody's had trouble with their mood or something, but you don't want to point it out because you don't want to go through the trouble of working through it with them or something like that. So you just don't name it. You don't say, oh, you've got, I don't know, bipolar or something. You're just avoiding talking about it. That would be definitely an example of not naming things. If you just said what it was, it might make everything easier and you know what to work on and whatever. But if you're just kind of like not pointing out that something's wrong or not identifying it or just maybe you have an idea like, oh, I might be onto something, but then just stop. I mean, that'd be like refusing to name it. Just you need to identify something in order to deal with something.